Nice. Wish I could
smoothly.
show you the same.
My car has been playing up, so I've not been able to get to the shop. So this is all I've got in the house. A little bit of oats, some protein, and some yogurt. Lovely.
Nice. At least, yeah, it's a good concoction. I thought you were going to tell me it had like courgettes and spinach and all of those.
Oh, that's fancy. Not that fancy. There's some raspberries in there. Give it some colour.
Oh, good.
Good afternoon. Is it after? I think it's PM, isn't it? So good afternoon.
Yes.
I hope everybody is well, and I hope you can still join us. I think the event is still live on LinkedIn. So if you're here, please say hello to us. We like to see people joining in with the conversation. It's nice to know we're not talking to ourselves. But I am very lucky today to have my friend Hayley Farrell on to talk around well-being in large organisations, what she's doing at the moment, what she's done in the past, as she is an award-winning wellbeing practitioner. Pretty cool to have her on. You're distracting me already by putting stuff in the private chat. Really excited to see what kind of bits of advice she'll give out for people to take home. If you have any comments or any questions or any bits you've seen in your workplace or what you've been doing, please put in the comments, and we can discuss that as well. And I will get to them when I can. But before we get started, I'm just going to introduce myself in case you've got any of your people coming along, Hayley. So my name's Richard Turner. I'm the founder of Employees Health. I'll bring it down a little bit. Employees Health is a workplace wellbeing company which helps businesses look after figure out what they're doing for wellbeing in the workplace. But we also, and most importantly, help employees understand how they can live happier, healthier, higher performing lifestyles. So that's kind of what we do. If you want to find out a bit more, obviously reach out to me afterwards, and we can go through that. More importantly, I am joined by, as I said, Hayley Farrell. But rather than me butcher her introduction, I'm going to let Hayley introduce herself, tell us about all the great things she's done, who she is, etc., etc. So, Hayley, hello.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for having me. So I'm essentially just a Pietermaritzburg girl out of South Africa who left South Africa eight years ago now. It'll be my 8th UK summer, and boy, am I glad to see the sun finally showing its face around town these days. But yes, great to be here. So where I'm at the moment, I am the Global Wellbeing and Resilience Director at Arcadis. I'm also the Program Affinity Group Project Manager. So I kind of wear 2 hats. I am looking at the Global Wellbeing and Resilience Strategy. We are in 70 countries globally. So we have got intersectionality with inclusion and diversity as a fundamental part of what we do when it comes to wellbeing. I then, as I've said, Affinity Group Program manage our 5 employee represented groups at a global level. So I look after our chairs and deputies, I govern them, and I make sure that we're achieving any objectives that we set in terms of driving that change from the bottom up. So we talk about the grassroots level. How are we really listening to Arcadians? But also how are we influencing strategy based on lived experience? So that's where I'm at the moment. I can't believe that I will be saying that I will had been at Arcadis for nearly a year in July. So we're on 9 months, I suppose, at the moment. Prior to that, I was at MCOR UK. MCOR UK is a facilities management organisation in the UK, and I was there for, I think, just shy of 7 years, and really did the employee life cycle journey with them. Started in recruitment, went into kind of HR officer roles, advising roles, business partner roles, then went into wellbeing at a pivotal time, I think, for wellbeing within the UK, but specifically within MCOR. It was when we moved wellbeing out of the people function, so out of the human resources function, we moved it alongside sustainability, assurance, risk management, and health and safety, social value as well. And I think I owe a lot of what I learned and my perception in terms of where well-being sits within an organization and how actually it doesn't sit in one place. But my lens on well-being grew and flourished through that adoption of taking a multifaceted approach, I think, to the whole person at work. Prior to that, was in South Africa, got a background in human resources, so did a CIPD level 7 HR, did some psychometrics and psychology in that. I also did a personal training qualification, and I think that's where you and I kind of had a coffee over right in the early days. So quite multifaceted, I suppose, in terms of the lens that I look at things through.
That's one word for it. Multifaceted, loads of strings. I'm thinking, you're still in your 30s. How have you done all this stuff already? It sounds incredible.
I mean, I don't know if my body agrees. As you know, I'm coming out of a pretty rough time with my health the last week or so. But yeah, I do sometimes find myself, you know, reflecting on where you are. And I think this is important part just for not individuals, but as part of your well-being journey. Take stock of where you are and how far you've come before you always set where you want to go next.
Yeah, for sure.
Personally, it's something I've always struggled with. You know, they say as part of therapy or counseling or any kind of coaching, take time to celebrate success. I think a lot of people struggle with that. But I think it is so important to stop and say, wow, I'm here. And you know what? It's okay to just be here for a while. You don't need to go for anything else. You know, you need to embed that as well, regardless of where you are in your personal life or in your well-being strategy, to be honest.
I think that was the message from our last conversation, wasn't it? It's actually just a reflection on, I've done all this great stuff. But I think when we're in it, we get lost by it. We get lost by the big goal at the end. We actually never look back and go, okay, we've done all this kind of cool stuff. Actually, that gets missed throughout it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing. There's some bits I've written down which I'm going to come back to when we get to them. But I think to keep this in kind of a focused way, I think we should look at kind of what you're doing now, because obviously both organisations you've worked at have been large organisations, right?
Yes.
With loads and loads of people, over different countries, etc., etc. And so if we try to look at both, and then we'll look at kind of the ISO 45003 that you did in MCOR afterwards. So if we look at Arcadis, you've been there for nearly a year. What does your job really kind of involve? What do you have to do? I mean, your title is pretty long, bit of a mouthful, but you've got, obviously, as you said, two sides to it. So it'd be quite good to hear what that looks like for you. We'll kind of dive into that in a bit more detail.
Absolutely. I need to buy a new ring light. It's not great, is it? Perfect. So when I joined the business, there was a need to really understand, take stock. Where are we at? We used to be a country-based business, so the country would operate very much in terms of everything, all resources would run within country. So if you're thinking IT, people, payroll, I know that sits in the people function, marketing, comms, everything was resourced within a country. I moved in probably about a year after they had gone into a global model. So with that transition, there are some things that you have to fundamentally do first, like payroll, because it's probably good to get everybody paid first. And then there's some things that over time we start to look at culture change. That was when they brought me on. I was, I guess, identified as a top candidate to join Arcadis because there was this will to start to identify where are the gaps in their existing global health and safety management system standard, to where are those gaps in terms of psychological health and safety. So globally, we have a system that looks after physical safety, but with the words like well-being, with the words like psychological safety, with the words like psychological health and safety flying around, what does that actually mean to our business? So I was brought on to do a gap analysis, look at the needs, the needs assessments, look at data, look at what is going on in terms of all the wellbeing interventions and initiatives happening globally. How do we streamline that? How do we get rid of things that aren't making an impact? But how do we also standardize? And I remember talking about this when I started. How do we standardize what well-being means to Arcadis? It's great that there are a lot of white papers. There's a lot of frameworks around the word well-being, but that's easy when you're in a smaller organization or in an organization within the same country, because you can refer to the same documents. When you're global, you really have to build a brand around what does this mean to us? Because I, in the UK, privileged to be in a society where we worked really hard, I'm not saying we're there yet, to end the stigma around mental health and illness within the workplace. Speaking to colleagues in other countries like Macau, like Sao Paulo, those are conversations that are not being had, not even within families, let alone in workplaces, just because of cultural difference. So what I've spent the last couple of months doing is, firstly, building relationships with people. You've got to build global relationships. Yes, that means getting up at 4 o'clock sometimes for a really early meeting and staying online later. You flex as you need to. But building relationships, looking at data, collating, and developing a framework of how are we going to create the same environment so that it doesn't matter who you're speaking to. We came up with 6 fundamental or minimum requirements that each country needs to kind of abide is a very strong word, but get on board with and look into to be able to standardize what we're talking about. And we rolled that out at the beginning of this year. So after 5 months of kind of doing as much as a deeper dive as we could, because let's be honest, things are not perfect in a global organization, in any organization. Trying to get data, often it's lagging indicators. There isn't a lot of leading indicators in this space. It takes time, but we grow and we evolve and we're agile, but we have a starting place, and that is what we've focused on. A lot of that involves growing our support networks. So we're looking at our wellbeing strategy in kind of 2 buckets. How do we, probably 3, how do we respond to ill health? How do we promote flourishing? But how do we also prevent harm? So how are we responding to injury management, rehabilitation to work? How are we treating people's mental ill health? But how are we also educating them to self-manage? What professional help have we got to be able to signpost people? But also, are we growing that network? Mental health first aid, we're calling them wellbeing advocates, because mental health first aid is not recognized globally. So it's not inclusive for us to train some people in MHFA and other people not in MHFA. We are adopting a different approach in terms of broadening the understanding of what wellbeing means, because MHFA people just think mental health. They forget to understand that well-being is multifaceted, as we spoke about that word earlier. So that is the respond to ill health. When we talk about promoting flourishing, what tools and education are we giving people to self-manage themselves, but also to have the awareness to recognize in others? And something that we are looking at getting better at is, rather than this parent to child relationship between an employer and an employee, it's an adult to adult relationship. As an employee, you have a responsibility to be the CEO of your own health. You need to take that responsibility. We are, as an organization, need to prevent you from exposure to harm within our workplace. So more of an adult than parent-child relationship when it comes to health and well-being is what we're aspiring to. And that is through listening, through creating the sense of belonging and the psychological safety where people can talk about things and can come up with innovative solutions together. We're also looking at things like positive work design as part of that promoting flourishing piece. And then the prevention of harm is really that systems-based approach. How do we align psychological health and safety with physical health and safety in the workplace? That comes down to risk, so that we can go upstream. What are those risks or hazards that are having a negative impact on employees, so that are causing burnout, that are causing stress, that are causing people to leave the organization? All of those things impact well-being. Can't really talk about well-being without talking about retention. Why are people leaving? So what hazards are we mitigating to prevent all of that, and how can we own it? So a couple of different buckets in that well-being space.
You got your hands full, right?
And it's a journey.
Yeah.
It's good to say, it's all mapped out, but hopefully in 5 to 10 years' time, I can look back and say, yes, and we've achieved things against that lovely mapped out process, because what's the point of a process if things aren't happening? But it's about taking that slow, impactful approach rather than trying to do everything, because you realize you've got so many gaps. There are always going to be gaps. There's going to be a gap in a policy. You cannot, even though my second hat is ED&I, in being inclusive means there are things that you cannot get to. You can't be inclusive to everything, everyone, all of the time. Things have to be prioritized in a long list of other business priorities, to be honest. It's not just my door or it's not just me banging doors. We've got the sustainability agenda banging doors, social value. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. I think that's also another thing as well, right? Like you've been in this role for a year, and you're in an organization with 30,000 plus employees over 70 different countries. Like, it's not as much as we all think, this can be really easy. This can be done really quickly. Actually, things take time. And as you were speaking there, the one phrase that jumps to mind is you can't throw a handful of pasta at a wall and expect it all to stick. You have to throw individual bits for each bit to stick. But that takes time. And then I wanted to kind of dive into a couple of things you said in a bit more detail. So you said you've created 6 requirements. It'd be nice if you can share what those requirements are.
Yeah. Some of them are very tactical, because we have to understand that there's different levels of maturity. We have some, so I don't know if you heard, it's 70 countries, not 7 countries. Yeah. So we've got some countries where there's no employee assistance program, because there is no provider in a country, because they are that, I don't want to say they're not mature enough in this conversation. So we're looking to global providers where they can increase their reach into countries where there are fewer employees. So things like standardizing our global employee assistance program, things like looking at existing policy and where is that policy inclusive of psychological health and safety? Where is it inclusive of well-being? And that stretches all the way from an absenteeism policy through to going on site and doing a risk assessment policy, all the way through to human rights, to be honest, because I'm working with our human rights director to do like a go, no-go project. When you're identifying clients, if the clients aren't aligned with your values, how far are you going to stretch your people? Because you're never going to be able to get it right if you're going into the environments where they aren't right. What's the common thing? You can put a fish or plant a tree in soil, but if the soil isn't the right soil, the tree's not going to grow no matter how much you water it. So a couple of those fundamental things we're looking at. We're also looking at expanding our wellbeing advocate network globally. So we're doing a big focus on how are we already have our affinity groups, which they're 5. We've got pride, age, access and neurodiversity, gender, and ethnicity and heritage. So now we see wellbeing advocates not being an affinity group, but very much working alongside another group community where we can listen and belong and have an opportunity to be adult to adult. So we're growing that. We have also come up with a clear mission statement and what does, 5 ways to wellbeing in the UK is, if I recall, eat, be active, nourish, take notice, listen, and connect. Are there 6, maybe?
Mhm.
We have adopted not that framework. We've actually adopted the framework. Can't remember what the name is. There's so many. We've adopted a number of different frameworks, and we've got 5 ways to Arcadis health, safety, and well-being.
Mhm.
And that includes things like the ISO 45003, how work is designed, what your social factors at work like, and what your physical working environment looks like as a pillar of well-being. Health is a pillar, but health is all inclusive of mental health, physical health, absenteeism management, occupational health, health surveillance.
Mhm.
So we're getting really broad in terms of, so that was another one of the 6 is identifying that and identifying a mission, identifying a brand. We're doing 2 big campaigns this year. One is around mental health stigma and bias, and we've got a global webinar launching on the 13th of April. On the back of that, we've got campaign resources that we're doing a global campaign around mental health stigma and bias. Again, how are we getting the countries that don't talk about this up to the same level of maturity? Let's bring them along. But on the back of that, we're also doing tailored specific training. So we're tailoring training for line managers, leadership. I think we've got a line manager cohort of above 4,000.
Mhm.
So we're doing line manager training, like foundational training, and then enhanced, so a line manager journey that I'm busy writing at the moment, and an employee journey that I'm writing at the moment. So we're doing tailored in-house with a number of different resources from different things. The other big thing is we've just launched our resource hub, I suppose, essentially, but there is wellbeing literacy now globally for everybody across a number of different topics, which actually is all inclusive of the physical aspects of health. So we've got nutrition, we've got be active, we've got sleep as a base starting point. We've got to start somewhere, and we're giving people access to these resources. So now that I've had some time to reflect, quite a lot in there, actually.
I'm just thinking, yeah. You've been going for like the last 7 minutes, telling me all this great stuff you're doing. And I think what's nice there, I think you hit it nail on the head. You're doing different bits, hitting different elements of both the global scale you're trying to hit, and manage that, understand and put the right processes and systems in place. Putting well-being people in the right places, and then looking at training, look at the education and the awareness around all of that. It's a pretty good thing. It's a pretty good kind of way to be managing this, all within 1 year as well, right? And so,
no pressure, Rich. I've only got 3 months left of the year.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're doing a pretty damn good job. And this is the next question here is going to be the one which really kind of shows you how difficult this can be. What's the challenges? As Hayley Farrell, the one person within wellbeing, leads all of this, leads that couple of different groups, and then is, as you said, writing up training for both enhanced managers, normal, enhanced and normal, plus employee journey, plus training for everybody else, and then leading the wellbeing advocacy, and then doing the inclusion stuff. What is the challenge? Or challenges?
You know what? Somebody said to me the other day, one of our grads who I kind of mentor, she said, I don't want to say I'm busy because everybody's busy. And I was like, that's a really good shout, And I guess it makes me think of, there are a lot of challenges. It is still, the word well-being has been around for a lot of years now, many years. So is psychological safety, but like well-being was the buzzword, psychological safety, I think, has become a bit of a buzzword. Mm-hmm. And then there's psychological health and safety management. And the reason I keep bringing this up is because the biggest challenge, I would say, is I want to be able to not be in a room. I want conversations to happen, change to happen, and for there to be a level of understanding about what we're talking about without me being there. I don't want to have to go in and fight a fire, So I think the biggest challenge is educating people on what this means to a business and why it is important. And
so you're in the same boat as me then?
most probably, but educating everybody in the chain, up the chain, down the chain, left, right. What are we trying to do? We are not just trying to create a nice place for people to be at. Yes, that is an outcome, a good place for people to work in. But an input of that is, what are the things that cause this not to be a good place? What are the hazards that are going to impact people? And how do we get that right? It's not about seeing a nice shiny toy and putting that on the bookshelf, another toy for the child to enjoy for half an hour. But at the end of the day, they actually just want mom's attention. No amount of toys is going to deal with or solution. It's not even a problem, because even that language, we talk about there's a well-being problem, or there's a problem in the world of work where people are ill. Maybe we need to flip the narrative. It's not a problem. It's about, how do we become sustainable? How do we become better? How do we enhance everything that we're doing?
I think whenever we've spoken, whenever I think of Hayley Farrell, the thing I always remember is your concept of managing risk. I always think Hayley Farrell is, okay, how do we reduce the amount of risk our workplace has, the amount of risk we put ourselves in? And I feel like that's really ringing out a little bit from what you're saying, is actually there is elements of, as a business, and what you're trying to do is creating a great place to work, an outcome from having all these bits in place, but is managing the risk to people so they can have that great place to work, and they manage the risk to themselves as well.
But creating an understanding of why. So yes, we need to. I will go beat many drums about the risk-based approach, looking at the hazards. But why? Not because, there's a risk management and we do that for finance, or we do that for IT, or we do that for when there's a massive disaster and we know how to deal with people. What is the impact that it's going to have on your business? What are all the issues that you're having? And trying to change that narrative of, we're not just doing well-being because you need to be an organization that seems to be doing well-being. And this is not just speaking for Arcadis. I get asked this question during panels and conversations, because everybody's feeling it. How are we going to change the needle in this space? And that the challenge for me is, how do people understand why we're doing this and how we do it collectively? It's not just the responsibility of the employee or employer. You've both got a role to play. We've all got a role to play. And that role is by trusting each other. And that's where psychological safety comes in. Trust, innovation, speaking up without fear of repercussion. But that psychologically safe environment enables us to say, okay, here are all the hazards. And if we don't do anything about it, we're going to have people go off sick. But until you've got trust and safety and this feeling of belonging, it's very difficult to talk about things like workload, like autonomy, like poor management who've been there for 35 years. What do we do about them? If you don't have that safety, but they're two different concepts, because you can have safety, but what's the point of having safety if you don't know how to deal with it? If you don't have a risk management-based approach to deal with it. So that's the challenge that I would say to people. We're creating the psychological safety space, but for what? Just so that people come and tell you that they're struggling. But if you're doing nothing with that, because your workplace is expecting them to work 60 hours a week, it's not a great place to be, is it?
100%. Great answer. It does feel like we should end now, but I'm not going to end because you've got so much more questions to ask. It's like the perfect way to finish, but it's not. So that's Arcadis. You've done all this great stuff. But for people who know Hayley, or if you don't know Hayley, Hayley obviously kind of hit the scene within wellbeing and work a few years ago by implementing the ISO 45003, which is the wellbeing standard being brought in, and at some point will be a requirement, I believe. At some point, they're trying to make it a requirement within workplaces. As you can tell, I'm not an expert in this area. I can imagine Hayley is an expert in this area after winning awards for it. So tell me a bit more about how you implemented this, what it is, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, go.
And go.
I'm just going to sit here and listen and smile.
So, fingers crossed, it becomes legislative. Very pleased to say that in Australia, there are a number of different states where it is now a regulation. So they are leaps and bounds ahead of anybody else in the world. And the most exciting news, and I know we're not talking about the US, but the most exciting news, Australia, is that they are getting it into foundational schooling age. Mm-hmm. How amazing. I mean, Rich, the stuff you do, how awesome if we got this into the lives of people at young ages so that this becomes their norm. That's what I always say. We want to work ourselves out of a job eventually because this should be normal. Yeah. All of the stuff we're talking about should be normal. We shouldn't be trying to, so.
Different culture there, though. There's a very different culture, and I think it's a whole cultural thing. Like we are so high demand, high pressure, high stretch country. Whereas I feel like Australia doesn't have that same pressure or high demand, I guess.
Yeah, but what ISO 45003 essentially is it is guidelines. So it is an ISO standard. It is not certified. You can be audited and you can make sure that your business operates in accordance to ISO 45003, which is fantastic for things like, really demonstrating that you're taking this stuff seriously, that you put your people first. Really important for things like tenders, but it's not something that most organizations go after because you can't get accredited for it. And it's always put in the too hard bucket because it is quite difficult. What is it? Essentially, it is looking at your systems. How do you look after your people throughout their entire journey? And how do you identify what's going to impact them? How do you consult with them about those things that you've identified? So think about a new recruit. How are we making sure that their onboarding process supports their well-being, supports lack of socialization, isolation? Do they have a buddy? Is their line manager doing their check-ins with them? Do they have the physical resources to do their job? Do they know how to manage their time? Is their workload suitable? Do they have a job description, etc.? We do it quite well, I think, for a lot of organizations. During the recruitment process, we onboard them and then we leave people. We just leave them to get on with their jobs. And we have touch point sessions either through an engagement survey, or often people get confused between performance management and actually just having a conversation around, we can see there's some challenges. How can we both work to improve it? And that's what 45003 does. It looks at the hazard, consults with the employee through different kinds of work streams, whether it be a health and safety forum, whether it be the HR business partners, whether it be HR surgeries, drop-ins for people to discuss, through all of your survey data. And you then come up with solutions, and then you monitor those solutions to make sure that they have an impact on things that are actually going to make a difference for people. Because I come back to, I know it's kind of a catchphrase now, no amount of apples and yoga is going to fix a person's stress level. Okay, but we don't know what a person's stress level really is unless we sit down and we ask them. Because a survey on the 4th of the 4th, 2023, when I'm 6 days post quite a lot of antibiotics, is going to tell you something very different to when I'm 3 months into a job without any holiday. It's a snapshot in time. Consultation is such a massive part of well-being, because what do they want? Why do they want it? And what do they need? That's going to help you know, where do you invest your money, where do you invest your time, and where do you get buy-in from the business? Because you can't get buy-in on everything. We don't have endless pits of money when it comes to this kind of stuff. But for me, the concept of that makes sense, right? In the same way that I would go to a site and say, okay, I need to put cones around that manhole. I need to make sure that I've got a risk assessment for 2 people going up a ladder, because you know that one needs to hold the ladder and the other one, whilst the other one's on the top. I would go into an organization and say, okay, those people are in telesales and they are taking 30 calls per hour. Most of them are saying, can cause a lot of stress because they're working in, let's say, for an example, an insurance company that's phoning up about life insurance. It must be awful to sit and take 30 calls around hearing people's parents, family members have passed away and they need to claim insurance. How are we protecting those people? Because that inherently, are we giving them more breaks? Do they have autonomy to step away and speak to a psychologist or a counselor if they have got a need right there and then? Or are we saying, work an 8-hour day, do everything you need to, then go and deal with what you need to outside of work? And we can't resolve everything, and we are all running businesses, but where can we work together? And that's what I love about psychological health and safety, is it's doing the same thing for psychological as it does for physical, looking at the environment and what is impacting you.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's being able to understand the difference and the roles of both, and then how you implement that into a workplace. And that's what that IIS 45 is, isn't it? Or 003, however you want to call it.
Yeah. And I come back to that. You asked me, what's the biggest challenge? That bridging that difference between how do we have those conversations and support the well-being of people in the organization, but we also want to care about well-being and psychological safety. But they can all work together, but they're different things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is a real challenge, I think, in our well-being space when we talk about these kinds of things.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? And I also think it comes back and it potentially kind of answers, I don't know how to say your name, Nizuki. I think I might be. Can you see some comments up top? Can you see that question? But my kind of slightly answers that, and I think it goes back to everybody's different. Everybody's going to have different needs, and to being able to support it as a workplace is going to be really hard. But if you can look at both mental health and physical health and all the rest of the different areas within those kind of 5 pillars you spoke about, the 4 pillars of mental well-being as well, you can kind of cover some of those supporting areas around the ISO 45003.
Absolutely. Nzioki, I think you've answered it really well, Rich. You need to broaden the understanding, because for me, what I'm seeing is people just think mental health. Absolutely, we need to promote a case for promoting mental well-being, but what about all the other parts that impact well-being? It's not just mental health or mental ill health. It's change management, it's stress, it's lack of purpose, lack of career progression. All of those things are the systems within your organization. And that's what 45,003 says. Look at all your systems. How are they impacting people's well-being?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that rhetoric is the thing missing from well-being, or well-being. The reason why I hesitated there is I think when we talk about well-being now, what do you think about? The first thing is mental well-being, rather than actually well-being is the whole holistic person. It's how somebody turns up and performs at work, right? Especially with well-being at work.
Yeah.
So it's not just our mental well-being. It is, how is our lifestyle outside of work? What's our purpose and meaning? Are we having joy coming into work? Are we connected to the people there? Etc. etc. All these kind of things play a big role on a person's well-being, or on a person's mental well-being, because that's the thoughts we have in our head every single day. So I think that's the important part we have to kind of go back to when we think of well-being at work.
Language is so important.
Yeah, exactly. You see it, and I see it all the time in my role, right? Like, you're always focused towards mental well-being, but actually, for me, that's big bit missing is that well-being piece. It's all the rest of the stuff around it as well.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go back to your question, Nizuki. how do you make a compelling case for well-being, or promoting well-being in a workplace with a variety of workers, hence different risks? How do you say? I presume he's kind of asking, how do you promote this to senior management?
Yeah. You want me to answer, Rich, or are you going to jump in?
You go. Because you're the one who have this. You'll have this in a workplace regularly, probably.
I think I love that you firstly said they have a variety of different risks. So if you've risk mapped them and you know what those risks are for different job roles, different levels, different grades, I think that's really important. And that's what I love about taking a psychological health and safety risk-based approach, is that it's not looking at the individual, it's looking at the job role and the inherent risks that they might be exposed to just because they're doing that job, or they are on that site, or they are facing that client. So data, risk, and trying to draw correlations between, there must be a reason why. Why do you want a mental well-being? Why do you want to promote mental well-being? Is it because these workers are going off sick? Or are you seeing a high retention rate? How can you draw correlation between the risks that they're exposed to and what's going on? But I would also say, look at things like, where's your company tendering? Who are their partners? I know that for our supply chain, we're now asking supply chain, what do you do to look after the health and well-being of your people? Because if you're going to work for us and we're looking after our people, you're an extension of Arcadis. So you need to leverage things like your supply chain. You need to leverage the ESG agenda. So the S being social, the social impact that organizations can have on the health of their own employees and therefore the communities in which they live and work. The human rights element. So there are a number of different ways, but also looking at things like legislation. In the UK, the Health and Safety at Work Act says we have a duty of care to, and we're legally responsible to look after the health and safety. For years, we've shouted safety, we've whispered health. Everybody's forgotten about health. Health is mental well-being. So you need to look at, I think, what you've got and what the language the business speak to be able to put together a compelling business case that's going to land with them. Looking at your data, but also broadening the conversation, like Rich said. I don't know if that answers it.
I think I'm just going to add something to that, and I think it's understanding all that and I'm getting the data for it as well. Lead with data, because once you've got data, you can go, this is why we need to do this, because it's costing us this, and our people aren't happy. So use that data, use this data, use different data points for each section you're trying to argue that case for. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, data is everything. I am launching a campaign in 10 days' time, and I'm still being asked why. And I'm saying, because your data is telling you this is why. And they go, okay.
I'm asking the question. Leave me alone. Wicked. I've got, in theory, 3 more questions. Okay. And once we're done, we're done. And so my first question is, what's on the agenda? I think you've given us some of this. What's on the agenda for Hayley Farrell and Arcadis this year?
This year. Right. So we are aspiring to have a clear understanding of how we can fill in our global gaps from an ISO 45003 perspective. So it's really exciting. We've completed our global gap analysis. We're in the action planning phase, and then we're going to go into identifying stakeholders and mapping out how we close some of those gaps to make sure that all of our systems, all of our processes give consideration to psychological health and safety in the same way they would physical safety. So that's a huge, big thing for Arcadis this year. When you say for me and Arcadis, are you asking me personally, or are you asking me to join them together?
Yeah, join them together.
Join them together. Yeah. I think the other thing is embedding Arcadis 5 ways to health, safety, and well-being, and the understanding of what well-being means to us. You know, we've got 8 months left. I would like for us to by the end of this year, have a better starting point. Our foundation is a little bit more solid. We're going into the beginning of planning for our next 3-year strategy in terms of corporate strategy. We've got 3-year strategies within Arcadis. So we have got our CEO outgoing and our new CEO incoming, and he is driving this agenda through the lens of sustainability and through social impact. And we want to make sure that we are, but this is the opportunity to be fully aligned, because now we have a clear direction of what the well-being mission is, completely aligned with corporate strategy. And I see them going hand in hand together alongside our affinity groups, to be honest, because that intersectionality in terms of how do we create a space where people feel like they can belong. And that's our goal, I think, for this year, is if we can get all of that aligned, we already have a great sense of direction of where we're going this year, next year, and the next in terms of well-being strategy. But the messaging
needs to be aligned
is really important.
Yeah, love that. Great answer. The next question I'd written down is what do you see well-being as at the moment? I think we've kind of covered it throughout the whole kind of conversation. I'll maybe answer this one, and then we can go to conversation. I think from what you've said throughout this, it's what is well-being in the workplace right now, and how do we see it kind of, how to see it land in the moment. I feel like the important message you've kind of said throughout this, it's being able to bind and can combine those different elements of risk, physical health, safety, mental health, psychological safety, all into one piece. Would you like to kind of expand on that, or fill some gaps?
Just repeat the question for me, Rich.
How do you see well-being in the workplace now?
Right now,
the term well-being in work. Is there anything?
I still see it quite fragmented.
Yeah.
I still see there being a lack of understanding of who owns it. Nobody owns it. We all have a responsibility and a massive part to play. Things like microaggressions, we all have a part to play in calling out microaggressions. Microaggressions impact well-being. It's this very big moving, I don't know, it's like a spinning plate with lots of different things that are cutting across the plate at any one time. And I don't think we've got that quite right just yet.
Yeah.
With also the conversation happening in pockets of, but we're not bringing it together in terms of how they all impact a person, a human-centered person, and how that will have an impact. You can't isolate one part of well-being, in the same way you can't just tell people to drink water. You need to drink water, and you maybe need to increase your steps and maybe look to change a small part in your diet. Not one thing is going to solution a bigger societal challenge.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good answer. Better than my one, anyway. And then the last one, this is your favourite one, which I've thrown on you 2 minutes before we joined. What's your top 3 take-homes? And you might have changed since, obviously, I said I'm going to ask you this question. What's your top 3 take-homes from this session, or bits of advice to kind of walk away with to implement well-being in the workplace in a large organisation?
I would say you're the CEO of your health, and everybody, from no matter what part of the business you come from, needs to be accountable, but also lead by example. And that is quite strategically placed, because we talk about leadership accountability all the time. But you need to be accountable for yourself first, and you need to lead by example. And that, I think, is so important and part of self-management. Personally, we hear this all the time, but your health is your wealth. And I think the other thing in terms of Don't be afraid to have difficult conversations. This is difficult stuff. This is not easy stuff. And it's not all packaged in a nice bow. And you will get challenged. I get challenged often. So know that if you are in this space and you're doing it, know that you're doing it for the right reasons. Keep going, be resilient, but don't be scared to have those conversations and challenge people's understanding of what well-being means. Challenge the language being used, challenge the true impact of an initiative rather than just doing it because it's seen to be having a good impact on well-being. So I think don't be scared to have those more difficult conversations.
Yeah. So I got 1, you're the CEO of your health. 2, don't be afraid of your difficult convos, or have I missed one in between there?
I suppose health is your wealth was a personal one for me.
Okay.
Yeah, don't be afraid of difficult conversations, but also, and I suppose health is your wealth as well comes back to it's a tough gig.
Yeah.
So look after yourself. I mean, I feel like I should be listening to myself say this, but I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Like we cannot make the changes. I always say, be the change you want to see in the world. You cannot be the change if you're pouring from a cup that it doesn't have to be overflowing, but just make sure it's full enough to be able to keep giving.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you ever so much, Hayley, for joining us. Follow Hayley if you're here watching. Follow Hayley on LinkedIn. She is on there sharing bits of advice, sharing all the great stuff she's doing. If you want to find out more about what you can do in a workplace, obviously you can always reach out to me and we can have a conversation. Nazuki, thank you for your comment and your question. It's great to have you here. But everybody else, if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you. We had a great session. Hayley, thank you so much. I don't have any time to say thank you already, but let's move on. See you all soon. The next one is in a couple of weeks with Emily Christmas from Carrington West, who are smashing their wellbeing strategy. So yeah, actually, I think the title is going to be retention for not salespeople. I can't remember now. Anyway, move on. Terrible, cool. Isn't it? See you all soon. Bye bye.
Thanks, Rich.